welcome to Behind the Pages. Dorah Blume is with us today. Dorah is the author of Botticelli's Muse. This is a work of historical fiction set in Renaissance Italy, and it focuses on the artist Botticelli, his painting of one of his masterpieces, La Primavera, and also on the young woman who was both his inspiration and a complicating factor in his life. Welcome, Dorah.
Thank you for inviting me. Yes.
Let's start by having you tell us a little bit more about your book.
Well, as you said, it's set in the Renaissance in the late 1400s. Takes place over 18 months. That's just about it. From 1477 to 1478, the time it took him to make that painting. And it's really about, I like to call it a love quadrangle. You hear about love triangles all the time, but he is torn a lot between his love for painting, his love for Floriana, his allegiance to the Medici family. So you've those three things, and also his relationship to the church and his spiritual path.
Because he saw his painting as his gift from God and to God. So this was not just a love of art, but it was what he considered, I think, his gift to the church. Is that right? Not
really. No? Actually, it was a departure from.
Okay. Yeah.
It was, what was so amazing was most of his painting up until that point was of a religious nature, religious subject matter, and very much a result of the dictates of his patrons. This was the first time in his life that he is given total artistic freedom. And at first, he's not too excited about it because he has a new patron who's like half his age, who he doesn't particularly care for, a distant cousin of Lorenzo. And he discovers that when given total artistic freedom, he doesn't know what to do. So it's a real dilemma for him. And he definitely does not want to do religious subject matter. His religion, you could say, is his devotion to beauty. And he felt that certainly God has given him this talent to express beauty, not necessarily through religious subject matter.
Floriana, who is his model, basically for this painting, we first meet her, and she is imprisoned in a tower, almost basically being punished because she was falsely accused of having offered her body to priests when in fact she was violently raped. Can you tell us a little bit about her as we first meet her? What were her circumstances?
She's a pretty interesting character. She is Jewish, a weaver. There were many people during that period in history. Many Jews were tailors and weavers and doctors and lawyers, actually.
Right. Professionals,
And she was an orphan. Her uncle had been a tailor and had taught her how to basically read and write. And she had traveled with him for about 3 years as an apprentice. They did a lot of clothing for the elite, for wealthy Christians. And at this point, she's finished her internship with him, and she's on her own, on her way to Florence to be a weaver.
Floriana tells Slavia, who is the abbess of the convent where Floriana is basically imprisoned. She tells her that about the assault on her. Slavia has heard a different story from the monks, but she tends to believe Floriana. Why is that? What does she see in Floriana that makes her understand.
I don't want to give away too much in the story, but
I mean, just in the beginning, when she's looking at this young woman who, at the moment, is basically kind of being punished for being a fallen woman, what would you say she saw in her that made her understand that this was a truthful person?
I think she could see that she had been a victim. And from Oslavia's own observation and experience living among the clergy,
yes,
she had observed situations like that in the past, so she knew it was totally possible.
So this idea of the monks being celibate, being obedient, she already knew there was another side to that, didn't she?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. Oslavia is moved to help Floriana. As an abbess, how much power did she have to do this?
Well, in the story, the monastery is on one part of the compound, and the convent is on the other. So she's in charge of the convent. And when we meet Floriana in the tower, she's at the monastery at that point. So she's been given a task of assessing Floriana's guilt and then taking care of her after that, bringing her over into the convent. So she has quite a bit of influence. She's still under the control of Bandini, who is in charge of the whole, both houses.
And for women of her time, she probably was in a powerful position, but there were really no women who were in more powerful positions than men, were they, in the church system?
What I found out in doing research was that the Dominican order was started by women.
Ah, okay.
They were the first.
Ah, okay. All right.
And then the men followed with their own version of it, but it was actually started by women.
Interesting. However, the hierarchy ended up being men were in charge and women were somewhat secondary, but she did have some power to...
She had quite a bit, and meeting Floriana is a catalyst for her to really come into her own power. It's a very important part of her life.
Yes. Slavia tries to get the name of the person who assaulted Floriana from her, but Floriana doesn't actually know who it was, does she?
No, because her face was pushed into the ground, into the earth. She did not see her attacker.
She talks to Father Bandini about the young woman. Now, her first task is she's supposed to convert Floriana to Christianity, have her renounce her religion, be converted. What would happen? What are Floriana's choices at that point?
Not very many. In fact, Bernardino he's a Franciscan, and Bandini has written to him. Bernardino is famous as an anti-Semite and a collector and imprisoner of Jews. So if she doesn't convert, she's going to be. It's going to be. She's not going to be found innocent. She's not going to be released. So she's offered the opportunity to be in the convent. In fact, they ask her to put on the habit for protection.
Yeah. And is her life in danger if she doesn't convert?
Absolutely. Because according to them, she has sinned, and if she gets sent to Bernardino, her life is definitely in danger. Absolutely.
Yeah. When we first meet Sandro Botticelli, he is sketching his patron's 15-year-old cousin, just kind of doing a little sketch, and his former patron at that point announces, oh, this, by the way, is now going to be the person who is supporting you.
Right.
What's his initial reaction to that?
Shock.
Yeah.
For a variety of reasons. First, because he had no warning. Second, he doesn't really like Piero at all. He's always made fun of him, even in the sketches. And third, he feels betrayed in a friendship because he's been living in the Medici household for years.
And he doesn't, and this is a 15-year-old. He's how old at this point?
No, he's 15.
No, I meant Sandro.
Oh, Sandro's 33.
Yeah. So there's a big age difference. There's somebody who is suddenly supposed to be an adult because his parents have died, but he's a teenager.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah. Lorenzo knows that the transition is going to be difficult for Sandro. So why is he doing it?
For financial reasons. Even though they were a banking family, they had a lot of uncollected debt. They had, for example, France owed them a whole lot of money, and they defaulted. Also, they lost the papal account, which was a huge blow to the bank.
So what does that mean, they lost the papal account? Because this is important to the time period.
The Pope, the seat of the Catholic Church was in Rome, and the Pope was there and would borrow money to do certain things. And he would do that. He would do a lot of business with the Medici Bank. It's kind of the beginning of capitalism, actually, the whole history of the Medici people, the family and their banking empire. And there was a town called Imola that the Pope wanted to basically buy, but it was a very key spot, and Lorenzo didn't want to give him it, and so the Pope was very upset, and he withdrew his account. So they were definitely experiencing a loss in income.
Because no matter how big and powerful a family is, and they certainly, I mean, anyone who knows, has looked at any history of that time period, the Medici family was kind of basically everywhere, throughout Europe. But, those kind of, even a family like that, big accounts, there's not that big of a tipping balance, and once it sounded like, at least at that time, things were starting to tip in the wrong direction for them. Well,
that was a huge blow, losing that account. And they lost it to the Pazzis.
Which is the other competing family.
Competing family.
Yeah, of that time.
And the source of the Pazzi conspiracy. Which is happening and building in the background of the book.
Piero is 15, as you said, or 15 and a half, and he seems somewhat, self-centered and pretty much self-centered, a bit egotistical. If we could ask him, what would he tell us Sandro's reaction was when Sandro was told that Piero was going to be his patron?
What would Piero say?
Yeah, would he have noticed?
Oh, of course, yes. And he tries to, he tells him, it's not so bad. I'm going to give you can paint whatever you want. Yeah. You can have whatever models you want.
I mean, he seems almost wanting to please Sandro, even though he's the one paying him. So, well, why? Why does he feel the need to please Sandro?
Because he has tremendous respect for him. And you'll see during the course of the book, Piero's character goes through a lot of changes, and he turns out to be a pretty interesting and important character, and a true friend to Botticelli.
Well, that's one of the things I like about the book, and one always wants to see the characters move a little, but he seems too young and unimportant to pay any attention to, and then he starts to slowly grow in character, which I like a lot.
I'm glad you saw that.
Yes.
Yes, he's become one of my favorites.
Yes, yeah, and I didn't mind too, but I didn't think he would be. So.
And in the sequel, he's really under a lot of stress.
Yeah.
I'm discovering as I write it.
It's a fun thing about being the creator.
Right.
What was his reason for sponsoring Sandro Botticelli? Was there a financial gain for him, or was he doing this purely out of love for the arts?
Well, I think he thought of himself as a kind of miniature Lorenzo, and also it was a family characteristic to support the arts, but also he has borrowed money. He's due for a sizable inheritance when he turns 18, but at 15 he can't touch his inheritance, so he uses it as collateral and he borrows money from Manfredo.
Okay, so in his
and the deal with Manfredo is that Manfredo says part of the deal is that you're going to get the artwork. He's going to be in line to own the artwork if Piero defaults on the loan.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So there's a lot of reasons.
So in their time, was it, you hear so many artists who didn't sell none of their work sold in their lifetime. They were very poor. At this time period, would Botticelli's work have fetched money? I mean, was he well known enough by then? Okay.
Absolutely.
Before actually heading to the country estate, Sandro, I think on his way from Florence to the estate, he meets Jerome, who is another important character. What he meets is this emaciated-looking Dominican monk who is in rags, and he's I think he's lecturing. He's standing kind of on basically a soapbox type of thing. Well, what is it about the monk that makes Sandro stop and actually listen for a moment?
Well, he stutters, and the tone of his voice, and he has a magnetic personality, absolutely, and he's at the same time kind of laughable.
Yeah,
it's kind of a mixed thing.
And Sandro really, I think, in some ways too, is interested in him from an artistic standpoint, not so much what he's saying, but kind of looking at the lines of his face. Later actually thinks of him when he's trying to, decide what his next painting is going to be. But it seems to me too that he's sort of interested in him from an artistic standpoint. What would you think?
I would. It's more that Botticelli is trying to move away from art as an expression of religion at the time. He's trying to move away, and Savonarola sees art at this time as a travesty. I mean, any of the subject matter that has to do with any kind of pagan observance or gods and goddesses, or even classical roots, he just eschews all that. He thinks that the women in the paintings look like whores, and so he doesn't have a lot of respect for Botticelli. Botticelli, on the same, doesn't want to paint those kinds of things that Savonarola thinks are appropriate.
If anything should even be painted at all, in his view,
Well, during that period, a lot of people couldn't read, and so they would educate people about the Bible through paintings.
Sandro goes to visit his sister also, prior to getting to the country estate. And his sister is Oslavia, I should say, the abbess of the convent. Can you tell us about this reunion between the brother and sister?
Well, it's charged with a lot of emotion because she feels that she's been neglected by the family. During that period, sometimes a girl at the age of 12 from working class people will be sent to a convent, and in her case, that's what happened. And he had been taken in by the Medicis, and so he was kind of living like a noble, and she felt neglected.
Yeah. So she's both happy to see him and a bit mad at him.
But she also was crazy about him, because when she would come home and visit, she would take up his cause and protect him. So there's a lot of back and forth.
And she had been sort of a mother to him too when they were younger, hadn't she?
She's older, quite a bit older.
Yeah, yeah. As Sandro arrives at the country estate, at Piero's country estate for the first time, and takes a look at this very opulent place, or a place that's sort of a bit under construction, but is clearly very lovely. What are the dynamics between the two men as they first start living in the same household?
Prickly. Very prickly, because Botticelli is pretty crushed by having been let go by Lorenzo, and he's a little bit annoyed. He doesn't like his new patron.
Right.
He is outraged that he's been demoted like this. And Piero has said that he's going to give Sandro total freedom, but he just wants to look at the work while it's being done. So they have this conversation about, and Piero finally agrees that he's not going to look at the work. He promises he's going to trust. He's going to trust.
So if we could
Botticelli.
ask Sandro at that moment, why are you so insistent that he not look at the painting? What would Sandro tell us? Was this an issue about control, or was there a real reason for it as far as he was concerned?
I think.
Or what would he tell us? I mean,
he
was
would
his reason.
say, "I'll surprise you, and I will do something beautiful, but I don't want you meddling." I think he was afraid that he would meddle in and give his opinion. And underneath that is the fear that Botticelli had that he wasn't going to be able to come up with anything.
Yes.
Because he's been given an artistic freedom, he doesn't want to be influenced.
Yes.
And yet he does want to be influenced, but he doesn't want to be influenced by Piero.
Right, right.
He's the last person he wants to be influenced by at this stage.
Yeah. And this is the first time as an artist that he's been able to choose his own
Subject matter.
Right? Yeah, yeah. I do want to talk about the first time that that Sandro and Floriana meet. Can you tell us about that scene?
Well, she's been weaving, using flowers to weave a crucifix. That's as close to converting as she's willing to be to do. And he has come to visit his sister, and he knocks at the door, and at that point, Oslavia is looking at the crucifix of flowers, and Floriana is closest to the door, so she opens and they see each other, and he's just kind of overwhelmed by her beauty and also what she's done. You know, this is incredible, large crucifix, all woven out of flowers.
Do you think his attraction also has to do with meeting a fellow artist? I mean, she is clearly an artist.
She's clearly very creative, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
We have just a few minutes left, so what I want to talk about in the last few minutes is a little bit about the writing of this book. What made you want to tell a story about this period of history?
Well, it's kind of mysterious because I didn't know I was writing a story about this period. This all started from a free write with a group of other writers one summer, and I found myself writing in the voice of another person. It wasn't myself, somebody who was confined. That tower scene was actually the first thing, and it happened 2 or 3 times over the course of the summer that I kept coming back to that voice.
Yeah.
And it was a very slow unraveling, realizing that this was the person who was known as Flora by the art historians in that painting, and that I was actually writing about the creation of that painting. And the characters in the painting are characters Most of them are characters in the novel.
How much did you know about the history of that time prior to starting the writing? Did you have to go
Well,
back?
I had studied painting in Florence at the
Okay.
Accademia when I was 19.
Nice.
That was the first time I saw that painting. And I've gone back to Italy countless times.
So you knew something about that period of time historically as well as the paintings from that time?
Somewhat. I just felt like there's seeds were planted over a course of years to turn into this novel. I didn't know that I was going to be writing a novel about when I was a painting student at the Accademia. And studying printmaking and looking at, you know, Florence is just filled with all of these museums. In fact, the first time I went there, I was overwhelmed by how many.
Yes.
It was too much for me. And I left. I went to Perugia to learn Italian.
Oh, really?
At the University for Foreigners. And that was in late August, and I came back to Florence in November and enrolled in the program. I would have gone to the program sooner, but it was sciopero, which means strike. There was a strike going on, so the classes had been canceled anyway. So that was a good motivation.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. For the history, because I mean, I know you studied the artwork of that time, but what was going on religiously, you know, sort of the pull between supporting the arts and is this really, you know, disrespectful to God to create art for the sake of art? I mean, the whole Renaissance, you know, was sort of teetering by then. Did you have to do a lot of research, or was that also something you had studied when you were studying art?
Well, in the course of writing the book, I did a lot of research, but I didn't do it like an academic. I would get to a certain point, I'd be writing a scene, and if I needed to find out about the food, I would do research about that, that kind of thing. But another thing that I think was a driving force is that even though this takes place in the late 15th century, a lot of what was going on in Florence at that time is mirrored in what goes on today. I mean, the struggle between religious fundamentalism and humanism. And Botticelli was very affected by the humanist movement that the Medicis fostered.
Yes. And it's true. It repeats itself year after year. Well, it's a great book, and I enjoyed every page of it.
I'm so glad.
Unfortunately, we are out of time.
Okay.
But I want to thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
From you've been watching Behind the Pages from the staff of 22 City View. I'm Diane Goshgarian. Thank you. Yes, and you know, I do love books that focus on periods of history, so that you kind of learn the history at the same time you're learning about the characters. You know.